There we go. I think everyone should be able to see my slides. So yeah, I'm Matuszewski, and I'm joined today by Claire Wallace and Joe Marshall. Yeah, we're going to be talking about how we've run a collaborative project, a structured collaborative project, to help us develop our capacity to run pedagogical research, specifically qualitative pedagogical research, as people who have primarily previously only had experience of subject-specific maths research. So this is something that we've been running for like a year and a half now. So if you were at Kettle Messoir, you will have seen a different version of the stocks split up into two, but we've continued working since there. So since then, so there are some more advanced results to report. So hopefully this will be interesting for people, whether you've heard us talk about this before or not. So yeah, let's start with how does one run a qualitative pedagogical research project if one doesn't have experience in doing that before? So where did this all start in Durham? Uh, so yeah, our department has a reasonably formal pedagogical group. This is a thing that's been going on for about 5 years now, and that's part of a move at Durham University, but also more widely in the country and further beyond, to give more formal recognition to people on who are primarily doing education at university. So creating a formal education track, which will hopefully be a parallel and equivalent to the more traditional education and subject research track. And this is something that is has become pretty well advanced at Durham Maths. We have uh, about 10 full-time members of staff in the group. We have a, a fixed-term conduct teaching fellow. We have a Durham doctoral teaching fellowships, which are standard PhD students, but who are funded through doing some teaching. And we've also got colleagues from other research groups in the department who are interested in helping us out. But for those of us on the formal education academic track, we are contracted to, in addition to doing loads of lectures and loads of tutorials and loads of marking, we are contracted to do something called provision, which can be really rather wide, whatever the department sees fit to support our education offering. So that can be writing e-assessment, teaching other people to write the assessment, working on accessible notes, developing better student feedback, and all of that can lead to well-defined promotion criteria. So it's pretty good. But with more of a push to have our to have our educational provision be evidence-based, there has also been an increasing focus uh, on uh, on doing proper pedagogical research and scholarship, and time to do that. Uh, but we, as we've said, we are all people from a maths rather than education background, and in particular, we have we had a very limited experience of qualitative methods. So that led to the big challenge, and that's the group as it was, I believe, not last Christmas, but Christmas before last. Uh, we can say that perhaps none of us know what we're doing, and perhaps this slide is from the previous version. So perhaps we should amend that now to none of us knew what we were doing. Hopefully, we're in a better position now. But despite that, we've always had loads of questions about how we can improve our educational offering, how we can help our students and people outside the university. So all of these things were things that we were interested which we were interested in, and these were things that we've been reading about in our pedagogical group reading meetings ever since the group was founded. And these are some of the things that some of us have been doing, or at least attempting to do, some independent research even before this project. So as you can see on this list, I won't read this out, it's a long list, but you can see things that are all very important and all things that I know a lot of you are also looking at. So the problem was that because of our lack of experience, because the education track role was fairly new, and there weren't structures to support us in that, or at least not very well-defined formal structures. Some of the projects that we attempted were successful, especially from people who did have that extra bit of experience or a little bit of extra external support, external collaborators, but in many cases, it just didn't really work out. So we've decided to run a structured collaborative project to help us build that experience and to support ourselves in doing this. So crucially, the structure was that we had a driving force in Claire who kept us on track, devised the schedule, devised the deadlines, and made sure that we all remembered to do the work, but also crucially, everyone who was interested got involved pretty much equally, that we all decided that we would all learn how to do pretty much all of the skills that we had time to learn, that we would learn how to do the ethics form, that we would learn how to do the literature review, that we'd learn how to select the methods to follow in a research project. And when we did that, we'd be able to support ourselves, we'd be able to keep ourselves on track, while also then allowing us to split up into subgroups to follow parallel projects which would have same processes, same timings, and different research questions, with the main goal at the end being to both develop our skills to enable us to do research in the future, but also to actually come up with some results that will answer important questions for the department and maybe even lead to publications. And we decided that the structure should be, how do students use something? All of those subgroups would aim to answer this question with a different insert text here. And looking back at that long list of research, potential research areas we had earlier, we focused on these first three: how do students use lecture notes, feedback, and then external resources, with two divergent branches not covered as kind of part of the main project that focused on why and how do students choose to do some particular modules. And we chose those questions, because because we were sufficient people interested in each one, because they were relevant to the conversations we were having in the department. They were not directly answered by the literature already, at least not in the context we're looking at, and they were adaptable in a way that would allow loads of people to take part and in this project, and also perhaps, as it indeed ended up happening, for people to join halfway through a project and to enable more people to take part as the availability allowed.
Okay, methodology. Here we go. Hopefully you can all now see my screen saying methodology. So we started off with a plan. As Merche said, one thing that I thought was really important was for us to pick a qualitative research method. We have a couple of people in the group who have some experience of statistics, and we have plenty of people in the group with no experience of statistics at all. But I thought that choosing something qualitative would mean that we were all on an equally incompetent footing to start with, and therefore we could all learn as much as possible. So we decided we would run focus groups based on each of these topics, do some thematic analysis on the responses that we got. Definitely all write up our analysis of what happened in the focus groups. Whether or not that led to publications was a conversation we should have. And also write a separate meta paper about what we learned from doing the focus groups, which is a bit like what we're talking about today. We thought this would take about one summer, we do all the prep, run our focus groups in the first term, October 2024, and have this all done by sort of the following June. That's absolutely not what happened. But let's talk through each of the parts. So, as I said, focus groups represented an opportunity for all of us to learn something entirely new to us. A big motivator for me was to help us to gain in confidence. And I think if we'd picked a protocol that some of us were familiar with, it maybe wouldn't have been so successful or effective. We also thought, our students are incredibly fatigued by surveys at the minute. It seems we're sending them something every other week and reminding them about the NSS and do your module evaluations and things. So we didn't want to do anything that would rely on our getting lots and lots of students to be involved. And also because we had 3 versions of this running at the same time, we wanted to make sure we'd be able to recruit enough students to have sufficient participation in each group. The side benefit of this one is that it was much easier to convince our department financially to let us pay the students for their participation when we said, it's something like 15 students in the end at £15 each. That's £200. It's going to keep us all busy all year. And that was determined to be a good deal. I think a different protocol involving more participants might have been viewed a bit less favourably. We thought this would be a protocol that would be fairly self-contained in that we would not end up with quantities of data that we were unable to get through analysis of. That's mostly true. It has taken us a long time to get through the analysis, but that's because we're all busy. But a 1-hour focus group transcript is very reasonable as a set of data to try and analyse. We did a lot of reading. The thing that I think was most helpful in actually making a practical plan for these focus groups was a chapter of the book Doing Pedagogical Research in Engineering by George Brown and Sarah Edmonds. Because engineers are famously even more socially awkward than mathematicians, there was a lot of advice like, say hello to your participants when they enter the room, make eye contact and shake their hand, that we were like, we don't need that, we're great at talking to people. But it was really helpful in suggesting a warm-up activity to get the participants thinking about the topic you want to talk them to. You should have 3 to 5 key questions, and you should have some additional questions ready to sort of branch off from that. And thinking about it in that way both made it a lot less intimidating to do, and also I think gave us a structure that has been helpful in the data analysis as well. We are using thematic analysis to analyse our data because it's a really popular and common means of analysis for data like this, but also because it's, again, something that we thought we could do. So Braun and Clark's book, Thematic Analysis, A Practical Guide, is the Bible for thematic analysis. It is extremely thorough. It's quite a lot of pages, but they do have a paper doing thematic analysis in psychology aimed at master's students, which is much more the level we're at as far as social science is concerned. And that's been really helpful. So it breaks your analysis down into 6 steps. You should familiarize yourself with the data, go through and generate some initial codes to say what people are talking about, group those codes into themes, review them, define and name them, which is somehow sort of subtly different from reviewing, and then just write it up. The groups have diverged slightly in that one of the groups is being much more efficient than the rest of us and has got a little bit further on with this, but I've decided we're on average at about stage 4. Thinking about it, this has been a much bigger project than we initially thought. As I said, I thought this was going to take like a summer, maybe a full 12 months. We are nearly 2 years into this and we're still going with it. Partially because the timing has been an issue. So on one hand, I was really determined that this should be a project in which all of us get a lot of new experience. And so that meant we should all fill in an ethics form and we should all have a go at transcribing a bit of the recording and we should all have a go at the data analysis. In practice, this means that if a couple of people are having a super busy term and they've got loads of teaching and can't really contribute, we're all sort of waiting for them. This is fine, I think, for us, because the goal is for us to learn something, but I wouldn't use this approach if I was trying to get some papers out on how students are using AI right now, because, you know, by the time we've done our transcription, never mind the data analysis and the publishing, everything's going to have moved on. Ethics approval was also surprisingly slow. As Maciej said, we don't have a huge amount of history of education-themed projects in our department, and that meant in particular that the ethics committee were not familiar with this type of thing and didn't know what to expect. So on our side, filling in the ethics form was slow because it was the first time. They're much less scary now that I've done one. They're so fine now. But also from the department side, getting ethical approval took some time. We definitely learned a lot of skills. I would say we now all have some qualitative research experience and we're more confident in doing qualitative research. And also we just sort of learned a lot of vocabulary, and we were working through the Braun and Clark thematic analysis book, and there's this whole section on positionality, which as psychologists, they're super willing to get into and like really dig into your biases and who you are as a person. And that was hard for some of us, but it was a really, really interesting 2-hour-long meeting where we all sat down and we started out like, oh yeah, you know, they might not be willing to tell their lecturers that they use ChatGPT for all their assignments. That might worry them, so we might not get total honesty. And then by the end of it, we were in like a completely different place and like looking at each other differently. It was really interesting. And I would recommend doing that, even if you're not doing the full project. I think the most important thing is setting expectations and keep on checking in. We've had people join the project, we've had people say they were keen to be involved in the project and then realise that actually they didn't want to, or sort of drop in and drop out. And that's all fine as long as everyone knows that's what's going on. That would be my big key piece of advice. If you're going to do something like this, keep checking, keep seeing what people expect. Are you expecting everyone to get a paper out of this? Are you expecting 3 papers with 4 authors each? Are you expecting 1 paper? You should know that early, because otherwise people get disappointed. Not that we've had that, but we have had a lot of these conversations of like expectation setting and things, and I think that's been really key to it being successful. All right, Maciej is going to tell us what he learned in his focus group.
And yes, it looks like my screen is sharing now. So yeah, I looked at the student use of feedback, and in particular, how students use feedback from traditionally marked homeworks versus feedback from automated e-assessment. So very quick background, at Durham, we've used some automated e-assessment since 2019, starting out with a small pilot project, but now using it in almost every first year module and quite a lot of modules at higher levels. And in most modules where automated e-assessment is implemented, it uses stack and it alternates with a traditionally marked written assessment, which in Durham maths is submitted on the Gradescope platform. And yeah, e-assessment has been very popular with staff since it reduces marking time. And we believe that if the questions and the feedback is well written, at least for the lower levels, it is very comparable in the level of detail to the feedback from manually marked assessments. But we weren't really sure if what students thought about it and how they used the two different types of assessment. So in the focus group, the first thing we asked them is, could they tell us what they thought good feedback was in the first place? And they said, a lot of things as we expected. They wanted feedback to be actionable. They wanted to know how they could improve. And therefore that while that feedback should highlight the positives, it should also be honest and should be at the appropriate level of detail, which in practice meant as much detail as possible. The students said that theoretically they could envisage a situation where they get too much feedback, but that they in practice have never had that situation. And yeah, they wanted feedback that pushed them to be better, but also feedback that showed them that we were paying attention to them, and also feedback that showed them that what we wanted, with the subtext there being very much them wanting to know what we expected from them on the exams and in other summative assessments. And do we meet those expectations at Durham? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. And in the context of a research question, I think what was most interesting is that students thought that there was both good and bad type of feedback across the two modes. With a traditional marked assessment, variation being within the modules, as there are usually lots of different markers marking the same homework, while with e-assessment, the variation was between different modules, because in each module, in most cases, just one person writes a question and therefore writes the feedback. So most interestingly, I think, how was the feedback used? And I think the key point that everyone repeated that they found really important was that feedback from automated assessment came in a lot faster than from traditionally marked assessment. The students said that if feedback got back to them like more than a week after they submitted, or at least more than a week after the deadline, they would very likely not have time to immediately go back and review it. And that would be both due to them having to do new assessment, and also because of them not necessarily remembering the exact questions, and it taking more time for them to remember all of that. So in a lot of manually marked homework feedback, they would not review it immediately, but they would very often save it for revision. While with e-assessment, students would have more motivation to review the feedback, especially since in many cases they would then be able to immediately reattempt a different randomized version of a question that they attempted previously, and to immediately implement the lessons of the feedback. The students said that, kind of on the other hand, while manually marked homework feedback is not necessarily more detailed, it can be more personalized. And in particular, if the students have made a very particular error or had a particular misunderstanding, a good marker can really help set them right. But they did say that, on the other hand, automated e-assessment can approach that if questions are split up into more sub-questions to give more points for feedback, to give more points where individual working steps can be analyzed. So, yeah, students in the end said that ultimately they did like a mix of both, with automated assessment being used for immediate learning in the most part, but then the students going back to the results from their manually marked homework when they were revising to make sure that they understood everything in detail. And here are some of the key quotes that we saw from students, with I think the last one being particularly relevant. E-assessment is practice, while Gradescope, and a reminder, Gradescope is a platform where students submitted manually marked homeworks, like the traditional written homeworks. So e-assessment is practice, while Gradescope is more, do you understand what you're doing? Gradescope feedback is better for revision. So how does that compare with the literature? So this is just a very naive comparison at this step, and there are just two sources I wanted to briefly touch on. Firstly, this rather old but I think well-respected quote from Chickering and Gamson. Improvement to student learning comes almost entirely from the actions of the students to close the gap between their performance and the requested standard. And I think in two rather different ways, both traditionally marked, manually written homework and e-assessment do satisfy this criterion. And more recently, like loads of people, including this source, have said that getting feedback very immediately is very important. And in this quote, it particularly refers to peer assessment, but I think it is far more general, which I think kind of explains why I think it is important that we maintain e-assessment as part of our assessment mix.
Okay, so hopefully you can see the slides now. Shout at me if not, if you see that moving. Um, okay, yeah, thanks, Matthew. So firstly, just to give a little bit of context, so I'm a PhD student. I'm on the Durham Doctoral Teaching Fellowship that Matthew mentioned earlier. So in practice, that means that my PhD is in mathematical physics, but about a third of my time is spent, either doing tutorials, marking, or being involved with the pedagogy group in other ways. For example, this project. Um, and so I wasn't with this project right from the start. I joined after the focus groups themselves had been done, just in time to do the analysis. So our group's been looking at how students use lecture notes. I guess within that, we're sort of including the printed notes themselves, but also how they're taking notes during lectures, and how those two interact. And at the moment, we're kind of starting to put a draft together. So if I say anything and someone thinks, um, I know a paper that's related to that, do point it out because that would be very useful to us. Um, so because we've more or less finished doing the analysis, I mean, we're still sort of revising over and over, but I thought it might be useful just to say a few things about at least my experience of doing that. I haven't sort of gone to the group and said, "Do you agree with this?" But I think they would with quite a few things. Um, so firstly, on the first pass of sort of going through the transcript and saying like, okay, what codes can I put to different parts of it, which will eventually turn into themes. One thing that I thought was kind of difficult was just figuring out what level of detail to put codes into, because I knew that eventually we were going to take these codes and turn them into themes, group them together, some would be merged. And so there's kind of a temptation to think to try and preempt that and think, okay, do I think these things should go together? I think that's probably not the best way to do things. Basically, what I ended up doing was just using the code's annotations on the first path, just looking at interesting things. And then when I've got this list of, you see slightly further down of the first pass, I had 90 different codes, not related to each other at all. Just kind of looking through those, trying to put them into a mind map, group them together, and come up with some themes based on that. I think um, that was probably the better way to go. Um, and the other thing was that on this first pass at least, I tended to put codes for large blocks of text rather than trying to single out sentences, because at that point I hadn't come up with the themes. And the idea is that, okay, when I'm looking back through what I've already annotated, I can then see things in the broader context and try and think if they fit into multiple themes. So I think, yeah, that was probably a good way to do it. Um, I mean, continuing the theme Claire was talking about before, it took a longer than I was expecting. Not ages, but I think that the first pass still probably took me 4 or 5 hours. Partly I was accessing NVivo, which is the software we used remotely, and so it took about 3 business days every time I clicked. But that definitely had a lot to do with it. But still, um, one thing I noticed looking at the transcript, so I wasn't there for the focus groups, but I think this is a very natural thing for the interviewer to do while they're going on. But there were a few spaces where, the students would say something and the interviewer would kind of repackage it and give it back to them and say, like, is that what you're saying? Um, and that's kind of useful to see the student saying, yes, that was it. But also, I think for the analysis, it's probably best to effectively just ignore that because you don't want to filter what the students are saying themselves through the interviewer's interpretation and then through your interpretation of what the interviewer said. So I think those things are best just ignored. Um, yeah, in terms of how the coding actually worked, like I said, after the first pass of just annotating things, I had about 90 different codes, and there were 208 places in the text that had at least one code. And after kind of reviewing that and taking it down to a mind map, I ended up with 37 codes now kind of tiered. So I had 2 primary categories and then 3 subcategories for each of those, and then further subcategories after that. And up to this point, it had just been kind of me doing the analysis and coming up with these themes. When we did after that, I think that there's 4 of us in our group. We all then met up and discussed the themes that we'd come up with individually, and sort of tried to converge on some themes that we all agreed on. We then took those themes away, redid the analysis with those themes in mind to see what showed up, and in particular kept an eye out for anything that didn't fit the themes we'd come up with so that we could discuss again and keep doing this iterative process. Um, so what did we actually find from doing this? So there were a lot of things that you kind of would have expected in advance. So students really hate inconsistency. Um, if different resources have different notation, this shouldn't be a shock. Students don't like that. One said the notation in the book is different to the notation that we're using, which got multiple audible gasps and laughs on the recording. It was just, I think, kind of just a shocking concept. Um, of course, there's good reasons that they don't like that. I mean, they're seeing these things for the first time. They want to know if they see a difference. Is it something of substance, or is it just how it's being presented? But we should bear in mind that, ultimately we do want to teach them so that they can understand things written in slightly different notation, so that they understand the underlying concepts. They also told us that how the notes are actually presented is important. Again, I don't think that's too shocking, but both the format of the notes and how they're actually sort of laid out on the page, are there gaps for them to sort of fill in proofs by themselves, this kind of thing. How they're using the notes throughout the semester changes. That's another obvious one because, how they're using them during the lectures is going to be very different to how they're using them in tutorials, which is different to how they're using them coming up to revision. And of course, this wasn't some uniform thing. How the students are using the notes, there is variation. Even just within lectures, are they annotating the notes or are they making their own completely separate? There are a few things that were maybe looking at them, you think, okay, that makes sense, but you may not have guessed in advance. So largely when the students are looking back at things, they're using the lecture notes, by which I mean the sort of typed notes that we give them, and not what they're writing in lectures. Um, so one student told us that in previous years I spent ages writing them and never looked at them again. I just reverted back to the official notes. They just didn't look at what they were writing in lectures um, past the lecture itself. We also found some quite strong opinions on the formatting. So one student told us, "I'm PDF till I die. I don't think I've ever opened HTML lecture notes unless by accident, and then promptly closed it." Whereas another told us, "I really like HTML lecture notes." So I think having the options seemed to be quite important to them. That they didn't want it to just be one or the other as a student body. One thing that we kind of picked up on, and this is more our interpretation, no one was saying this explicitly, but they seem to have quite a goal-oriented approach to the notes in that they sort of just view it as a checklist for, do you understand this topic? Like, can I do this chapter, this chapter, this chapter? If I can do all of it, then I know the topic by definition, even though, there's only a finite amount that can be in the lecture notes. And yes, that's a theme that kept coming up. So this is the structure of our themes as they stand. So we've split them into two main groups, which is student expectations of the notes and then how they're actually using them. Um, you can see there's a few things that again you'd expect. They like having the notes in advance before the lectures. How the notes are presented to them really matters. So both the format, PDF or HTML, the structure, like I was saying before, how the sections are ordered, if there's gaps for them to fill in their own notes with annotations. And then again, there's this idea that the students are kind of viewing the notes as the definitive source for the module. So it if something's not on the notes, then by definition, they think they sort of don't need to know it, even if you could reasonably consider it part of the subject. Um, because how they're using notes changes over time, we split the uses into on that basis. So how they're using them in the lectures, which again, they're mostly a lot of them told us that they take notes in the lectures mainly to just stay focused on what's being said. They're not writing things that they plan to go back to at any point. And then there's how they are using the notes after the lectures. So during tutorials, when they might be adding things, adding annotations, and then revision when they're sort of bringing it all back together. Um, Okay, yes. Let me back up some of that structure with a few quotes. So on the examples, it seemed that they really want examples in the lecture notes to be representative of what they might see, say, in an exam. Someone told us some examples in lecture notes. It's like doing a GCSE question in the lectures and then a step question or something in the assignment. They really didn't like that. We tend to give them these simple examples in the lecture notes, and then for good reason, in the exams, it's kind of applying that or maybe bringing multiple sections of the notes together. They weren't a fan of that, but um, related to that is this kind of mapping between the notes and questions. So if I give them a question, they sort of would like to say, okay, I just need to find which section of the notes tells me how to do this question. Um, Rather than which is we think is partly why they also don't like um sorry which is why they don't seem to like when that's not the case and questions are bringing multiple things together. And then again, something that came up many times was that they're viewing these notes as the prime source. So many of them told us that this is the main thing that they're using, and we think that what's in the notes again is just defining what is important for them. Um, yeah, so I'll just finish with this. So because we're kind of at the writing up phase and discussing what our themes mean and how we can analyze them, I think it's useful to say what kind of frameworks we're thinking about this from and some of the questions that this prompts for future work potentially. Um, So I think this relates to what Claire will tell you shortly, but we're wondering, can we explain students' preferences because they're viewing these notes as primary? So is part of the reason that they don't like being referred to other resources because there's stuff there that's not in the notes and therefore they might think is by definition not relevant. There's this question of how prescriptive we should be with it. So if they're viewing these notes as a checklist, um, is that, because that's kind of an expectation they've gotten from us. And how can we change that? Because, really we want them to be learning the topics or skills and not just what's in the notes and not have any clue about other stuff in the topic. So we split our two themes, like I said, mainly into expectations and uses, but obviously if they have certain expectations of the notes, that's going to inform how they're using them in practice. And so one thing we're thinking about is can we try and extract some of these specific links, either so that we can sort of guide the expectations at the start of a module, say this is what you should expect to get from the notes, um, or maybe so we can write the notes to conform to their expectations to make that kind of smoother. We don't know what the best approach there would be, but just some questions that have come up. Um, yeah, and then finally I think the younger students seem to largely say that they were just more or less writing verbatim what was said in lectures when they're writing their notes to stay focused. Some of the older students said, "Yeah, I used to do that, but I found it wasn't really useful." And so there's a question of whether students are kind of doing that because they think that's, what they're expected to do at university. You go to a lecture, you write down what's being said. And if they are just doing it because that's the kind of view they have of this, what can we do to kind of speed up that process, so that they're sort of using the lectures more efficiently, faster? Yeah, so I think that's all I want to say. So I'll hand you over to Claire now.
Yes, okay. So the focus group I ran was about student use of external resources. We had some really similar responses to what Joe said. So the overwhelming message we got was that they're not really using external resources if they can avoid it. They want to use our lecture notes. They don't trust other stuff to be the same as what's in our lecture notes, and so they're worried. The big theme that I'm seeing emerge really is that there are some resources out there that they don't feel equipped to use. They feel like they can't get anything out of textbooks because they don't understand the topic enough. So they're confused about something and they think, well, if I look in a textbook, I'll be even more confused. And talking to us is even worse because they think they'll either have a question that we can't answer fast enough. By the time they email us at 10 o'clock at night and then we see it the next morning and then we respond a bit later on, they've already moved on. Or worse, they think they'll look stupid to us. We ask them, do you talk to your lectures at the end of a lecture? Well, no, because other people will see me asking a question and they'll realize I don't know what I'm doing. We look like an idiot in all aspects. This was a big theme that really worried me because how do we make them understand that it's okay to not know everything? They're here to learn the stuff. We don't expect them to know it yet. We also asked them what they want, and what they want is for their life to be easier. They want more time. They think everything's happening too fast and it's hard to find things out. We can't really fix that. University is hard. It's harder than school. That's why there are fewer people here than there are at school. It would be really helpful if we could put something like this in our lecture notes, telling them where to look in textbooks. They asked for that specifically. And they said they want to feel that their lecturers are more available to them, but not by coming to office hours and not by talking to us at the end of lectures. They want a secret third option where they can talk to us without having to admit that they don't know things. But I'm going to finish my short section with this amazing quote from one of them who said, you give us so much stuff. Why are you offering us anything more? You're already doing loads. I think really the message is they want life to be easier in the way that when you're at the gym, you want the weights to be lighter. You've chosen to do this difficult thing so that you can get stronger, and it would be nice if it were easier, but realistically, that's not what's going to happen. So Mache is going to conclude for us.
So yeah, so while the analysis is still finishing up, I think we have found some really interesting things. Students can be uncertain about what works best for them, and there is, I think, a key set of gaps in communication and understanding between us and the students that drives that. For example, what Claire just said about students needing more guidance on how to use resources. But on the other hand, we've also received clear guidance ourselves on what to improve. More consistent notes, more personalization in the assessment feedback, a better signposting of resources, and a lot of new ideas for research. Why is there some way we can get a better understanding of why students don't use the support resources we provide, and can what we found cannot be replicated with larger groups and different research methods. So I think while it's taken longer than we had hoped, we found some interesting things. And in terms of building our experience of running this sort of research, I think this has been a success. Thank you everyone for listening. And I think we have a very short amount of time left for a question or two.
Sure, we'll just give a round of applause. We can do that with the React button as well. So yes, we don't have any questions in the Q&A. So if people want to put some questions there, then please do. It was a great little set of talks there. I was interested. I really like that idea, sort of like the nice idea, sort of like the how do students use such and such, and because it's like it's a great constraint, but it also allows a lot of adaptability there. So I mean, I know there's some comments in the chat about technology and how people are using technology. So I was wondering, how do students use AI?
So we, the external resources focus group, we actually ran twice, one with undergrads and one with postgrads. And the undergrads were really, really skeptical of AI. They all said, it's rubbish. You can put stuff in and it'll give you a method, but all the numbers will be wrong and it won't help you with your understanding. The message we really got was that if they've got 4 assignments due tomorrow, then they'll use ChatGPT to get some answers to the questions, but they don't think it's actually long-term beneficial. The postgrads, who were mostly international students, had completely the opposite perspective and said that they got a lot of help with understanding and intuition out of AI, which I thought was really interesting. I wondered whether there's a language component there that means having stuff re-explained just in different words is more helpful for the international postgrads than it is for our home undergraduates. But that's something to investigate further, I think.
Right, indeed. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot to investigate there. We do actually have a question here, but I was wondering if Maciej, could you stop sharing your screen for a moment? Perhaps we can see. Then in the recording it'll focus on the person speaking. So thanks. Yes. So some question from Francis. This is an excellent session work. How did you find NVivo learning curve high?
Yeah, I can go. So, we didn't, to be honest, use like many of the features in NVivo. To be honest, I think that the extent to which we've been using it, we probably could have achieved the same just printing it out and writing things down the sides. So we definitely haven't, at least in our group, I think, been using it to its full extent. But in terms of just picking it up, putting the document in there, code this section, structure the code, like tier the codes, I think it was relatively straightforward. We didn't have any problems with that. I'm sure there's much more you can do with it though, if you know what you're doing.
I would guess so. If the learning curve is really high. I mean, I've not used it.
One of my group members, so the protocol that we have, because our work computers are Linux, is we have to go and get into a student computer room and then remotely connect via Apps Anywhere to use NVivo. One of my group members described this as a hate-hate relationship. But I think that's more the setup that we're in trying to access NVivo than maybe necessarily the software itself.
Mhm.
And I think that because the data source for each group was a single mid-length transcript, that made that made it a little bit simpler as well.
Right. Okay. I know we're running out of time here, but there's an excellent question from Chris Brignall here. It says, what steps have they taken to get to grips with the literature and theoretical frameworks that education journals often require when setting up? Did you think about that?
I think what really helped us with that is that one thing that I think we have been really successful at is having regular reading group meetings, and we were, I think, pretty conversant with the literature and with those journals that deal with literature. And there was still a step of doing additional reading when we started, and then I think that there will be even more of that when we're looking at publishing the results. But I think we did get a reasonable head start because we had that structure in place.
Okay, right, thanks. There is one final question. I don't think we've really got time to do it, so maybe we can answer that one offline and then put it on the website. But I think we should perhaps end it there. I think Michael, are you gonna nod your head and agree?
Well, I think that's a very clear steer there, Kevin, that I should nod my head in agreement. But I think just to, on behalf of all of us, say a big thank you to Claire, Joe, and Maciej again for a great session, and I think reminding us of some of the great scholarly work that's happening. As Duncan has quite rightly pointed out in the chat, if colleagues are sort of exploring, doing research in this area, please do have a look at teaching mathematics and its applications as a potential publication route. Certainly, I think that's a really high quality and accessible journal that's ideally placed for this sort of work. So yeah, please do check that out. But again, big thank you to Claire, Joe, and Maciej for bringing that scholarly perspective and evidence basis to the work that you've been doing. And I think some fascinating outcomes to come from that will be really useful for us as a sector. So thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us, and also Kevin for expertly holding all of this together.